Okay, let's go. Number 1. Derinkuyu, Turkey. You are standing in a basement in Cappadocia, Turkey, in 1963. You are not an archaeologist. You are a homeowner who has just knocked through a wall during a routine renovation, and the wall has opened into a tunnel. The air coming through is cold, not the cold of an unheated room, but the cold of something sealed for a very long time. You hold your lamp into the opening. The tunnel descends. You follow it. It descends further. You find a room, then another tunnel, then a staircase cut directly into the volcanic rock, then another level, then another. By the time you stop, you are 18 stories below the surface of the earth, and you are standing in a city. Not a cave, not a shelter, a city. Derinkuyu is the largest excavated underground city on earth. It sits beneath the Cappadocia region of central Turkey, carved entirely from soft volcanic tuff, descending about 279 feet across 18 confirmed levels. The Turkish Department of Culture began formal excavation in 1969 and found infrastructure that exceeded any framework mainstream archaeology had prepared for. Stables, wineries, oil presses, communal kitchens, storage rooms, churches, schools, and a cruciform chapel on the 7th level with a vaulted ceiling cut to a height that was never intended to feel small. Estimated capacity: 20,000 people, with livestock, with 3 to 6 months of provisions, with water drawn from wells reaching a subterranean aquifer no surface survey had previously detected. There are 52 separate ventilation shafts running from the lowest levels to the surface. Each maintains cross-current airflow across all 18 levels. Not one is visible from above ground. No surface marker, no mound, no depression, no topographic irregularity indicates their position. The engineering required to design a ventilation system of this precision, invisible from the surface, distributed across about 279 feet of vertical depth, exceeds anything European civil engineers would produce above ground until well into the 19th century. That is a gap of approximately 3,000 years. The mainstream explanation is that Derinkuyu served as refuge for early Christian communities fleeing Roman persecution in the 1st through 3rd centuries CE, and later as shelter during Arab raids of the 7th and 8th centuries. Byzantine sources do reference underground refuges in Cappadocia during this period. The explanation accounts for the churches, the communal spaces, the sealed entrances. It is coherent. It is also incomplete. The problem is the Hittites. Cuneiform tablets from the Hittite Administrative Archive at Hattusa the KBO document series, partially translated by the German Oriental Society and published in their catalog series beginning in 1916, reference underground dwelling complexes in the Cappadocia region as early as 1400 BCE. That is more than 1,000 years before the Christian persecution narrative begins. The construction technique in Derinkuyu's deepest levels, systematic horizontal removal of tough and uniform layers to maintain structural integrity, is not consistent with improvised excavation by a population fleeing persecution. It is consistent with a planned, institutionally organized construction program. The probability of achieving the ventilation system's documented cross-airflow efficiency through iterative trial and error across about 279 feet of solid stone with no surface feedback mechanism is not a matter of luck. It is a matter of a complete three-dimensional plan that predated the first chisel mark. No such plan has been found. Some researchers, including Dr. Andrew Collins, whose work on pre-Christian Cappadocian underground structures was published in 2014, propose that the deepest levels predate the Christian era by several millennia, that later communities were inheritors, not builders. The most conservative stratigraphic estimate places initial construction between 800 and 500 BCE. That still leaves Derinkuyu standing for at least 800 years before anyone recorded that it existed. Who built the lowest levels? Why does the ventilation system demonstrate a precision that the civilization, assumed responsible for it, did not possess in any of its above-ground construction? And why was every entrance, all of them, on every level engineered to be sealed from the inside, with no mechanism for opening from above? Derinkuyu is not alone. About 656 feet from its lowest confirmed tunnel, connected by a passage that takes 4 hours to walk, is a second city. It was built by the same hands, or hands that knew the same things, and it answers different questions entirely. Number 2. Kaymakli, Turkey. You are moving through a tunnel not designed for your height. The ceiling sits about 4 feet 7 inches above the floor, which means you are bent at the waist, one hand trailing the carved wall for balance. The passage is smooth deliberately, consistently smooth, which means whoever cut it was not in a hurry. After several minutes, the tunnel opens into a small chamber, and on your left, set into the wall like a wheel waiting to be rolled, is a circular stone door. It is basalt. It weighs about 1,102 pounds. There is a hole at its center, fist width, and when you look through it into the darkness on the other side, you understand immediately that this door was not designed to keep people out. It was designed to let the people inside kill whoever was trying to get in. Kaymakli is the second city. It sits beneath the town of the same name in Cappadocia, 8 levels deep by current confirmed excavation, with lower levels sealed and unassessed. Estimated capacity: 3,500 people, organized along the same foundational logic as Derinkuyu complete self-sufficiency, total surface invisibility, and a defensive architecture so deliberate it functioned less like a shelter and more like a fortress oriented downward. The Turkish Ministry of Culture's excavation reports, compiled between 1964 and 2007, document stables on the second level, storage rooms calibrated for consistent low-temperature food preservation, communal areas on the third and fourth levels, and passages intentionally sized to prevent more than one person moving through them in any direction at a time. That last detail is not incidental. It is doctrine. The defense door system appears on every level, in every primary passage. Each door is circular basalt cut to fit its frame with tolerances a modern stonemason would not find embarrassing, mounted to roll across the passage from a single side only. The central hole is positioned at standing chest height on the interior of the defended side, designed to admit a spear or lance driven through it into anyone attempting to force entry from outside. You can seal the passage, hold the door, and wound whoever is on the other side without exposing yourself. This is a military engineering specification, repeated with identical precision across 8 levels of a city carved from solid rock. The mainstream explanation for Kaymakli follows the same framework applied to Derinkuyu refuge from Arab raids during the 7th and 8th centuries CE, consistent with Byzantine-era defensive behavior documented across the region. The historical record of Arab incursions into Anatolia during this period is well established. The problem is identical. The construction depth, engineering consistency, and systematic precision of the defense door specification across 8 levels exceed anything a population responding to an acute military threat with limited time and resources could execute. Emergency shelters do not come with standardized military hardware on every floor. In 2014, a ground-penetrating radar survey conducted by Nevzihir University confirmed what the tunnel geometry had long suggested. Kaymakli and Derinkuyu are connected by a passage running about 5.6 miles through solid volcanic rock at consistent depth, with branch tunnels leading to at least 3 smaller underground settlements along its length. The passage does not run straight. It curves and branches in a pattern consistent with deliberate routing around geological fault lines in the tuff. Whoever designed it knew the subsurface geology well enough to navigate around structural weak points across about 5.6 miles of rock. That knowledge does not come from intuition. It comes from a systematic survey conducted before excavation began. The odds of routing an about 5.6-mile underground passage around fault lines by trial and error, without surface survey instrumentation, and achieving the structural stability that has kept this passage intact for approximately 2,000 years, are not calculable as anything approaching reasonable chance. The livestock level closes the emergency shelter argument. On Kaymakli's second level, the stables are positioned directly above the human habitation levels, and Ministry of Culture temperature surveys confirm that animal body heat produces a measurable warming effect on the levels below. That positioning was not accidental. An emergency population does not engineer passive heating into its refuge. A population building for permanence does. Why connect 2 cities with an about 5.6-mile tunnel that routes around fault lines with a precision implying an advanced geological survey? What threat required 2 networked cities, 8 and 18 levels deep? And who maintained these systems during the centuries in which, according to the official record, no one was using them? The same behavior appears next, not in ancient Anatolia, but under a French wheat field, 2,500 miles to the west, in a city no official record acknowledged for 400 years. Number 3. Naours, France. You are a farmer in the Somme Valley in 1887, and you are following a fox. The animal has disappeared into a gap in a hillside you have walked past several hundred times without examining. And because you have nothing better to do this particular afternoon, you follow it. The gap widens into a passage. The passage is not natural, the walls are too regular, the ceiling too consistent, the floor too level. You keep moving. After about 131 feet, the passage opens into a corridor, and the corridor opens into a room, and the room connects to a street. Not a passage, a street. Vaulted chalk walls rise on both sides. Carved doorways lead to chambers left and right. At the far end, visible in the light you carry, is what appears to be an altar. You are standing in a city that appears on no map, in no archive, in no administrative record of the Somme department. You are also standing 66 feet below a wheat field that has been continuously farmed for 4 centuries. The underground city of Naours, formerly the site Souterrain de Naours, extends about 1.2 miles beneath the village of Naours in the Picardy region of northern France. It contains 300 individual rooms across 28 interconnected gallery networks, with confirmed capacity for approximately 3,000 people and their animals. The rooms include communal spaces, private chambers, chapels with fully carved stone altars and acoustically vaulted ceilings, and stabling areas with carved mangers still intact. The Atlas Obscura documentation of the site, compiled from excavation records of the Société des Antiquaires de Picardie, identifies the construction technique throughout as lime chalk carving with corbelled vaulting consistent with Roman-era quarrying practice in the region, not medieval improvisation. The ventilation system is the first remarkable detail. Naours has functioning shafts rising from the inhabited gallery level to the surface, terminating in configurations indistinguishable from natural rock formations. No surface signature exists. A person walking the field above would have no indication that 3,000 people and their livestock could be breathing filtered air below them. The engineering logic is identical to Durinkuyu's 52 ventilation shafts, maximum internal functionality, zero external expression. The cultures are separated by 2,500 miles and potentially several centuries. The solution is the same. The probability of 2 independent populations, operating in different geological media on different continents, converging on the same invisible chimney ventilation specification by independent invention, is the kind of probability that demands an explanation the standard historical account does not currently provide. The mainstream explanation is historically grounded. Naours was used as civilian refuge during the 100 Years' War between England and France, running 1337 to 1453, and again during the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648. Both conflicts brought sustained violence to Picardy, and the documentary record of civilian populations retreating underground during military occupation is well established for northern France. The explanation accounts for the habitation evidence and the communal layout. It does not account for the construction date. The Société des Antiquaires de Picardie's archaeological survey identified the primary quarrying technique as consistent with Roman period methods specifically. Systematic horizontal removal of chalk blocks using iron tools of a type that French medieval populations did not standardly employ. No construction order, no administrative commission, and no chronicle entry for Naours appears in any regional archive from the medieval period. The city was used during those wars. The evidence does not support the conclusion it was built for them. Then, in 1916, soldiers found it again. British, Australian, and South African troops stationed in the Somme sector during the First World War discovered the Naours tunnels and spent off-rotation hours inside them, carving approximately 2,000 inscriptions into the chalk walls' names, regiments, dates, drawings. The Historial de la Grande Guerre has catalogued 1,486 individually identified inscriptions from this period. Soldiers from 1916 were writing their names on walls built by someone no one can name, in a city no official record created, beneath a field farmed continuously for 4 centuries without anyone asking what was underneath. How did a chalk ventilation system designed to be invisible from the surface come to match, in functional logic, the volcanic tuff ventilation system at Durinkyu? Who cut these rooms? Under what institutional authority, if no institutional record of the commission exists? And how was a city sheltering 3,000 people maintained in operational condition across 4 centuries of continuous European conflict with no administrative record of the maintenance? The Etruscans asked a version of the same question 1,000 years earlier and won, about 124 miles to the south. They answered it by building beneath a city that would spend the next 2 millennia pretending the city below did not exist. Number 4. Orvieto Underground, Italy. You are descending through a trapdoor in a wine cellar in central Italy, then through a second door, into a passage whose walls change texture as you move deeper carved tufa, giving way to older, smoother stone below. The change is physical and unambiguous. You can place your hand on the boundary and feel where one civilization's work ends and another's begins. The upper section was cut in the medieval period. The lower section is approximately 2,600 years old. The city of Orvieto has been conducting its business on the street above this passage for the entirety of that span, and for most of that time, the administrative record of the city contained no reference to what was underneath it. The Orvieto Underground Network, formally surveyed beginning in the 1980s by the Cooperative Archaeological Organization, now operating as Orvieto Underground, contains more than 1,200 individual cave structures carved into the volcanic tufa beneath the medieval and modern street level. Wells, cisterns, olive oil pressing chambers, pigeon houses, and tunnel systems connecting private cellars to civic spaces and configurations, suggesting deliberate urban planning rather than improvised excavation. The network is approximately 2,500 years old at its deepest construction layers. Only an estimated 20% of the plateau's subsurface volume has been fully surveyed. The Etruscans built the original settlement on the Orvieto butte in the 7th century BCE. What the standard historical account underemphasizes is that the underground infrastructure appears to predate significant portions of the surface settlement. The tufa beneath Orvieto is soft enough to carve with iron hand tools and hardens on air exposure, a property the Etruscans understood precisely and exploited systematically. The survey identified construction sequences establishing the primary well system and interconnecting tunnel grid as contemporaneous with the earliest surface occupation evidence. The Etruscans did not dig down from an established city. They built both simultaneously. The subterranean infrastructure was part of the original architectural plan. The wells are where the engineering becomes difficult to explain within the standard account. They are not dug vertically to the water table directly below the butte, because that water table is compromised by the mineral content of the volcanic rock. Instead, the Etruscan well shafts are angled physically inclined at carefully maintained gradients, directing them to aquifer access points at the base of the butte's geological formation, bypassing the contaminated intermediate rock. The calculations required are not simple. They imply knowledge of subsurface hydrology that European engineering did not formally systematize until the medieval period. The Etruscans encoded that knowledge in stone in the 7th century BCE, and it worked well enough that the wells remained in active use when the Romans arrived. The probability that this angular well design bypassing a specific mineral contamination layer in a specific geological formation was achieved by trial and error rather than advanced hydrological survey is not one that the excavation record supports. The mainstream explanation for Orvieto's underground complexity is practical storage, and quarrying the tufa was a valuable building material, and the cavities produced by its extraction were repurposed for storage and shelter. The explanation is fair and accounts for significant portions of the network. It does not account for the angled wells, the pigeon house distribution patterns, or the ventilation configurations in the deeper chambers, all of which exceed what practical storage and quarrying would require and imply a coordinated civic infrastructure plan operating simultaneously above and below ground. After the Etruscans, the Romans. After the Romans, the Lombards. After the Lombards, the Papal States. Each successive administration used the network, expanded portions, sealed others, and produced no comprehensive record of the whole. When a section of road surface subsided into a cavity in the 1980s, the investigation that followed revealed a passage system connecting to chambers connecting to a network that the city then spent 4 decades attempting to document with only partial success. The 2019 ground-penetrating radar survey of the plateau identified cavity signatures in Trial and areas not yet physically accessed, several located beneath the foundations of the Orvieto Cathedral, built in 1290 on a site that Etruscan evidence suggests was already considered significant for reasons the medieval church construction documents do not record. Who made the decision to angle the wells at those specific gradients? What survey method did they use 2,600 years before geophysical imaging existed? And how does a knowledge system sophisticated enough to engineer around subsurface mineral, shanpianation, disappear so completely that the people inheriting it 2 generations later do not know why it works? The Cold War answered that question differently. It did not forget. It classified. Number 5. Burlington Bunker, United Kingdom. You are a resident of Corsham, Wiltshire, in 1957, and government vans have been arriving at the entrance to a limestone quarry on the edge of town for 2 years. The vans carry filing cabinets, office furniture, telephone switchboard components, catering equipment in quantities inconsistent with any workforce that would logically be stationed at a quarry. You have asked. The answer you have received from officials who arrive and depart without making eye contact is that renovation work is ongoing. You sign nothing. You are told nothing. This is accurate, in a technical sense, because the Official Secrets Act was signed by the people who do know, and you are not one of them. About 197 feet below the field at the edge of town, a city is being built for 4,000 people, and the people of Corsham are not among its intended residents. Burlington was designed for a specific purpose its architects hoped would never become necessary. In the event of a Soviet nuclear strike on the United Kingdom, the surface government parliament, the cabinet, the Prime Minister would descend into Burlington and continue functioning as the legitimate administrative authority of a country that would, in significant portions, no longer exist above them. The complex was built to sustain that function for a minimum of 3 months without surface resupply. It contained a BBC broadcast studio from which the Prime Minister could address surviving population centers. It contained a hospital with surgical capacity. It contained a canteen feeding 4,000 people 3 times daily from on-site stores. It contained, notably, a functioning pub bar, taps, licensed because the planners understood that governing a post-nuclear remnant state across 3 months requires the specific psychological infrastructure that the British associate with that particular room. The engineering specification reads like a document produced by people who had thought seriously about what civilizational collapse actually requires, operationally, hour by hour. Burlington had its own water supply drawing from a natural spring within the limestone formation, filtered through a treatment system installed inside the perimeter. Its own power generation, with fuel stores calculated for the 3-month window. A dedicated telephone exchange connected to surviving surface nodes through hardened cable routes classified separately from the bunker's own existence. Meaning someone cleared to know Burlington existed was not automatically cleared to know how its communications connected to the surface. The map of the system was layered. Each layer carried its own access classification. Burlington was maintained in operational readiness from approximately 1961 through 1991, 30 years. The caretaking staff worked under ongoing secrecy obligations. Supply deliveries arrived through logistics chains deliberately obscured in government procurement records. The facility had a railway connection to the National Rail Network, a branch line appearing in no public timetable, serving a station on no public map, carrying supplies to a city that officially did not exist. The rails are still there. Nothing runs on them. What the declassified files do not resolve is the operational philosophy behind the population design. Burlington's 4,000 spaces were allocated to government personnel, military staff, and essential civil servants. The approximately 52 million people living above it were not included in the plan in any shelter capacity. The facility's existence was concealed from them in part because its existence confirmed, explicitly, what the government's concurrent public civil defense messaging implicitly denied, that a Soviet nuclear strike was survivable by some, and the some in question had already been selected, housed, and catered for 3 months at a time beneath a Wiltshire hill. The probability that this omission was administrative oversight rather than deliberate policy is resolved by the planning documents themselves, which allocate Burlington spaces by government grade and contain no section addressing civilian evacuation, because no such section was ever drafted. Burlington was officially acknowledged in 2004 when the BBC obtained documents under the Freedom of Information Act. The government did not volunteer the disclosure. The facility is now periodically open for tours. Visitors walk the corridors built for a post-apocalyptic British cabinet. They see the telephone exchange, the canteen, the pub. What they are looking at is structurally identical to Derinkuyu, a complete parallel city, built for a selected population, maintained in operational condition, concealed from the people above it. The difference is 2,500 years of engineering refinement and a classification system instead of a forgotten archive. What does a government owe its population when it plans to survive them? Who decided a BBC studio was more essential than civilian shelter? And what exactly was the government prepared to broadcast to a surface population it had made no provision to protect? Number 6. Bunker 42, Moscow. You are a Moscow metro worker in 1954, assigned to a construction shift that assembles at a platform not listed on any public schematic. The train that takes you there runs a route that does not appear in the operational timetable. When the doors open, you step into a tunnel wider than the metro lines you have worked on previously, descending at a gradient steeper than any passenger platform requires. By the time the elevator at the end of the access passage stops, you are about 213 feet below Taganka Square, below the Moscow River's bed, below the metro system itself, in a stratum of earth that the city above has no awareness of in any functional sense. You sign the documentation placed in front of you. You do not ask what you are building. The surrounding environment does not encourage the question. Bunker 42 was constructed between 1950 and 1956 under direct authorization from Stalin, who had developed by that point a specific and well-documented interest in underground infrastructure. Its stated purpose was to serve as command and communications hub for Soviet long-range aviation, the nuclear bomber force, representing the USSR's primary strategic delivery system before intercontinental ballistic missiles made bombers operationally secondary. In practice, this meant Bunker 42 was designed to be the room from which Soviet nuclear strikes would be coordinated if Moscow itself came under attack. The construction workforce was drawn from the same labor pool used for Moscow metro expansion, providing useful administrative cover. Surface disruption from underground excavation at this scale is difficult to conceal entirely, but attributing it to metro work made the question stop. The complex covers about 75,000 square feet across 4 tunnel blocks, each about 591 feet long. The walls are reinforced with a steel and concrete composite rated for nuclear overpressure, at a specified standoff distance. The exact specification remains partially classified, but engineering parameters published in the post-Soviet period indicate the facility was designed for a near-miss scenario rather than a direct strike. What they could engineer against was everything short of a direct hit. The ventilation system filtered radiological and chemical contamination. The power generation was internal and fuel-independent from the surface grid. The communication arrays connected through hardened cable routes whose locations were maintained in a separate classified map system, stored inside the facility itself, meaning the map of how to reach Bunker-42 from the surface was kept inside Bunker-42. The facility was staffed continuously from 1956 through at least 1986. For 30 years, rotating personnel worked shifts in a complex appearing on no public map of Moscow, accessed through a surface entrance disguised as an unremarkable residential block on Kotelnicheskaya. The people in the apartments above the entrance knew something was below them. What it was, they did not know. Asking was not a behavior the surrounding environment encouraged. The post-Soviet record documents a secondary tunnel network beneath Moscow distinct from the metro system, running parallel to and below the public transit infrastructure, built specifically for military and governmental movement in the event of surface disruption. This network is referenced in declassified materials as the DSESESE system. Russian officials have at various points denied, confirmed, partially confirmed, and re-denied its extent and current operational status. What is not disputed is that Bunker 42 exists, was built for the purpose described, and was maintained in operational condition for at least 3 decades, while the city above it had no knowledge of it. The facility opened as a museum in 2006. You can book a tour. The guide takes you through the tunnel blocks, shows you the communications equipment, explains the ventilation system, walks you past the map room. The tour covers approximately 40% of the total floor area. The remaining 60% is not part of the tour. It is not mapped in any publicly available document. It exists in the same administrative category that the facility itself occupied before 2006, acknowledged as a concept, unconfirmed in specifics, present in the geological record of the city in ways the official record has not caught up with. The city beneath Moscow is larger than the museum describes. How much larger is a question that current Russian classification policy does not encourage? What was maintained in the unvisited 60%, who controls access to it now, and what does it mean when a government decides which portions of its classified history to release and which portions to leave, without explanation, behind a door that is not on the tour? Number 7. Camp Century, Greenland. You are a United States Army soldier at Camp Century in 1961, eating lunch in a mess hall carved from glacial ice about 98 feet below the surface of the Greenland ice sheet. The ceiling above you is ice. The walls are ice. The corridor outside is ice. The facility is powered by a nuclear reactor, the PM-2A, the world's first mobile nuclear reactor, installed by the U.S. Army Nuclear Power Program and operational since 1960. You have been told that Camp Century is a polar research station. You are watching a film about ice core extraction. The film is accurate. The ice core research is genuine. What the film does not mention, what your commanding officer has not mentioned, what no document you have signed has mentioned, is that you are sitting inside the planning infrastructure for Project Iceworm, a classified program to position 600 medium-range ballistic nuclear missiles beneath the Greenland ice cap within strike range of the Soviet Union. Camp Century was constructed beginning in 1959 under the administrative cover of Arctic research. The cover was not entirely fabricated. The facility produced ice core samples that remain scientifically significant and are still cited in climate research today. The cover was, however, deliberately selected because it provided a logistical and public relations framework for constructing a self-contained underground city in a foreign Prakanacht. Greenland is Danish sovereign territory without triggering the diplomatic consequences that the facility's actual purpose would have produced. The Danish government was not informed of Project Iceworm. The soldiers stationed at Camp Century were not informed of Project Iceworm. The classified program was declassified by the United States Army Corps of Engineers in 1995, 29 years after the facility was abandoned. The physical specifications of Camp Century match the pattern established at Burlington and Bunker 42. 21 tunnels, about 1 mile of total passage, capacity for 200 personnel. Hospital, church, cinema, gymnasium, enough food stores for extended isolation. The critical difference between Camp Century and the other sites on this list is that it was built inside a medium that was always going to move. The Greenland ice sheet advances at about 3 feet 11 inches per year. By 1966, 7 years after construction began, the tunnels had deformed beyond safe operational parameters. The ice had moved. The facility had not. Project Iceworm was abandoned not because the strategic logic had changed, but because the geology had won. The mainstream explanation positions Camp Century as a legitimate research station with a classified, secondary function, a dual-use facility of a type that Cold War military planning produced in significant numbers. The explanation is fair as far as it goes. The problem is the scale of the compartmentalization. 200 personnel operated the facility for 3 years. The nuclear reactor powering it was the most advanced mobile reactor the U.S. Army had produced. The construction required engineering solutions specific to the ice sheet environment that had no civilian research application. The probability that a facility of this specification, in this location, was primarily motivated by ice core science rather than by the 600 missile program it was designed to support is not one that the declassified planning documents, read in sequence, sustain. When the facility was abandoned in 1966, the assumption was that the ice would eventually compress and destroy the infrastructure. That assumption did not account for everything left behind. United States Army records, confirmed by a 2016 study published in Nature Climate Change, document that about 52,800 gallons of diesel fuel, biological waste, and low-level radioactive material were left in the tunnels at abandonment. These materials were sealed by ice at the time. The Greenland ice sheet is now losing mass at an accelerating rate. The materials left in 1966 are moving toward the surface. They have not arrived yet. The timeline for when they will is a current subject of active research. The men who built Camp Century were not told what they were building. That sentence is not a rhetorical formulation. It is documented in the declassified record. The personnel files, the construction orders, and the operational briefings available through the Army Corps of Engineers archive establish a compartmentalization structure in which the people executing the program did not have access to the program's stated purpose. They built it anyway because that is what the orders specified. How many other polar research stations are cover programs? What happens to about 52,800 gallons of diesel and low-level radioactive waste when the ice containing it melts? And who is responsible for materials abandoned by a classified program whose existence was denied for 29 years? The next city was built under a small Scottish town. No ice, no reactor. The concealment mechanism was simpler, older, and in some respects more complete. Number 8. Edinburgh Vaults, Scotland. You are a clerk in the Edinburgh Town Council in 1835, countersigning a document that authorizes the permanent closure of the arch spaces beneath South Bridge. The document is brief. It does not specify what is being sealed inside. It does not record the population currently occupying the vault spaces, their number, their trades, or what arrangements have been made for their relocation. It records a decision and a date. You sign it. The filing cabinet closes. Within 2 generations, the institutional memory of what was sealed and who was sealed inside it will have detached entirely from the institution that made the decision. South Bridge in Edinburgh was completed in 1788. It spans the Cowgate Valley using 19 stone arches, most of which were enclosed by tenement buildings constructed along the bridge's length within years of completion. The result was a structure that appeared from street level as an ordinary urban road flanked by ordinary urban buildings, while containing within its arch spaces a secondary city existing entirely below the street surface. The vaults were not designed for habitation. They were designed as storage and workshop space for tradespeople whose businesses occupied the street-level buildings above. They became habitation because Edinburgh in the late 18th century was one of the most densely populated cities in Europe, and density at that scale produces its own logic about who ends up where. The population that moved into the vaults was the population that had nowhere else to go. Cobblers, tanners, food traders, and wine merchants occupied the upper chambers where ventilation was adequate. Below them, in the deeper arch spaces, the population was different. Families, entire households. People working trades that required concealment, which in late 18th century Edinburgh included a significant portion of the city's economic activity. The body trade operated out of the vaults. Burke and Hare, whose names appear in every Edinburgh history written after 1828, were not an anomaly in the vault economy. They were an extreme expression of a commerce in human remains that the vault's geography made structurally possible, bodies moving through underground passages between the vault spaces and the medical school anatomy rooms without crossing a public street. The infrastructure for that transit was not improvised. It was used because it existed. Conditions in the lower vaults deteriorated through the early 19th century as the buildings above settled into the arch structures in ways the original construction had not anticipated. Moisture infiltration increased. Ventilation passages blocked. Contemporary accounts from the 1820s describe the lower chambers in terms that suggest the reality was worse than any description the author was willing to commit to print. The vault community persisted in documented form until approximately 1835, at which point the historical record stops producing evidence of habitation. Not because the population left in any recorded event, because the record stops. The Edinburgh Corporation records from this period contain no demolition orders, no relocation records, no public health enforcement actions, no documentation of what happened to the estimated 1,000 people occupying the vaults when the contemporary record goes silent. There is an administrative gap that corresponds precisely to the physical sealing of the spaces. The gap has not been satisfactorily explained in the 190 years since. The vaults were rediscovered in 1985 when a rugby ball rolled through a collapsed section of wall during a game in a repurposed storage space beneath the bridge. The player who retrieved it found a passage behind the wall. The passage connected to chambers. The chambers connected to a network. Archaeological investigation, beginning in 1988, documented artifacts consistent with continuous habitation through the early 19th century shoes, ceramics, children's toys, the remains of cooking fires, a medicine bottle whose contents were consistent with laudanum, personal property left behind rather than carried out. That is a behavioral pattern with a specific interpretation that the archaeological reports from the 1988 survey note without elaborating. The current tourist operation has access to approximately 1/3 of the total vault network. The remaining 2/3 are sealed, structurally compromised, or beneath building foundations whose owners have not granted access. Several passages documented in 1988 have not been re-entered since. One connects, according to the survey notes, to a space beneath a currently occupied residential building whose subsurface footprint was not known to the building's owners at the time of the survey. Its status has not been publicly updated since. Beneath Mexico City, the situation is not one of rediscovery. It is one of continuous emergence. The city above has never stopped being built on top of the city below. The city below has never stopped pushing back up. Number 9. Dixia Cheng, Beijing. You are a Beijing resident in 1969, and you have received instructions to report to a designated courtyard in your district at a specific time with a shovel. No explanation is provided. No architectural plan is distributed. No official program name appears on the document you have been handed. You arrive. Several hundred other residents are already there. Someone tells you to begin digging. You dig. This continues for days, then weeks, then months. You are not told what you are building. You are told that it is necessary, that it is for the defense of the people, and that you should not discuss it outside the courtyard. Across the city, in hundreds of other courtyards, hundreds of other groups of residents are receiving the same instructions and asking the same questions to the same silence. Dixia Cheng, Beijing's underground city, was constructed between 1969 and 1979 under Mao Zedong's directive issued following the Sino-Soviet border conflict at Zhenbao Island in March 1969, during which Soviet and Chinese forces exchanged fire in a confrontation that Mao interpreted as precursor to a full-scale Soviet nuclear strike on the Chinese capital. The directive, documented in Chinese Communist Party internal records, partially declassified in 2001, instructed municipalities across China to begin immediate construction of underground civil defense infrastructure. The Beijing network was to be built by the civilian population of the city, organized through neighborhood committee structures, without external engineering supervision at the construction level. The workers were not briefed on the program's scope. Most were not told what the finished network would be used for. The confirmed dimensions of the Dixia Cheng network are substantial, approximately about 19 miles of tunnels beneath the central city, more than 10,000 individual rooms, and a total designed capacity of 300,000 people. The infrastructure includes grain storage calibrated for 6 months of population support, wells with independent water supply, a hospital network, schools, cinemas, and munitions storage. It is not a shelter in the emergency sense. It is a parallel city, designed for parallel habitation, built beneath a functioning capital, without the capital's population being informed of its existence, its purpose, or its location beneath their specific neighborhoods. The mainstream explanation is rational Cold War civil defense. The Sino-Soviet split had produced genuine military tension, and underground civilian protection infrastructure was standard practice among nuclear-armed states and their neighbors during this period. The explanation is accurate as a description of intent. What it does not account for is the specific decision to withhold the program's existence and scope from the population building it and living above it. Burlington was concealed from the British public, but it was built by contractors who knew what they were building. Dixia Cheng was concealed from the people constructing it with their own hands. That level of compartmentalization applied to a voluntary civilian labor program is not a standard feature of civil defense planning. It is something else. Dixia Cheng was classified until 2000, when a small section was open to tourists. The Soviet threat it was designed to address had ended approximately a decade earlier. The 30-year delay between the conclusion of the threat and the partial public disclosure of infrastructure built to address it is not explained in available Chinese government documentation. The section open to visitors represents an estimated 10% of the total network by floor area. The other 90% remains sealed, unstaffed, and unvisited by any publicly documented inspection process. The most recent available Chinese government statement on the network's current operational status describes it as maintained. Maintained for what purpose, by whom, and inspected on what schedule are questions that the statement does not address. The network's munitions storage areas are referenced in the 2001, partially declassified party records as having been stocked during the construction period. No subsequent document in the available record confirms what happened to those stores. No decommissioning record has been published. The munitions storage areas are not part of the tourist section. What remains in the 90% of the network not open to visitors? Why did the classification persist for a decade after the Soviet threat it was designed to address had dissolved? And what is currently stored in facilities built by people who were never told what the facilities were for, beneath a city whose residents still do not know the full dimensions of what is under them? The last city on this list did not classify its buried infrastructure. It simply built a new city on top of it and kept building, for 500 years, while the city below kept emerging. Number 10. Tenochtitlan Remains, Mexico City. You are an electrical worker in downtown Mexico City in 1978. Drilling a utility trench in the street 2 blocks from the Zocalo, the main plaza, the geographic and symbolic center of the capital. Your drill hits stone at a depth inconsistent with any utility infrastructure laid in this part of the city. The foreman stops the crew. An archaeologist arrives the following morning. Over the next 6 months, what emerges from the excavation is a carved stone disc about 10 feet in diameter, depicting the dismembered moon goddess Coyolxauhqui in sculptural detail that indicates a ritual marker of primary significance, sitting about 26 feet below street level, directly beneath one of the most trafficked intersections in the Western Hemisphere. It has been there since the 15th century. The city above it has been built, demolished, rebuilt, expanded, and modernized for 450 years without anyone locating it. The drill found it because a utility crew needed to lay cable. There was no other plan. The Templo Mayor, the ritual and political center of the Aztec Empire, reported, destroyed by Hernán Cortés and his forces in 1521, was not destroyed. The Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia, which has managed the ongoing excavation since 1978, has documented successive construction phases of the temple extending back to approximately 1325 CE. Each phase built directly over the previous one in a renewal process that the Aztec construction record describes in ceremonial terms and that the archaeological record reveals as systematic encasement. The temple was not one building. It was 8 buildings, each encasing the last, the innermost dating to 1325 and measuring significantly smaller than the outermost shell the Spanish encountered. What the Spanish demolished was the exterior surface of a structure that extended downward through 7 earlier versions of itself, each ritually sealed before the next construction phase began. The excavation has reached the 4th phase in some areas. The deeper phases remain below current excavation depth, beneath the water table, beneath the foundations of colonial-era buildings, still occupied above. In 2015, archaeologists working beneath a colonial-era building adjacent to the Templo Mayor site uncovered at Tzompantli a ritual skull rack. The structure contained more than 650 human skulls arranged in a configuration matching Spanish colonial descriptions that archaeologists had not previously confirmed at scale. The discovery was published in Nature in 2020. The skulls represent individuals from across the Aztec Empire, brought to Tenochtitlan for ritual purposes and incorporated into a structure whose existence the colonial record described, and whose physical reality remained unconfirmed for 500 years. They were found because a building required foundation work. The investigation status of the surrounding area is listed in the INAH Excavation Registry as ongoing. Beneath the Zocalo itself, ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted between 2017 and 2022 identified subsurface anomalies consistent with large enclosed spaces at depths between about 13 and 46 feet. The surveys cover approximately 40% of the plaza's footprint. The remaining 60% has not been surveyed because the equipment cannot operate beneath the occupied buildings at the plaza's perimeter without structural risk assessments that have not been initiated. The identified anomalies include what the published survey report describes as a probable ball court, a probable secondary temple platform, and an enclosed space of indeterminate function measuring about 59 by 72 feet. Indeterminate function, about 59 by 72 feet, sealed beneath the central plaza of a city of 22 million people. The lake is the complication that every account of Tenochtitlan eventually reaches. The Aztec capital was built on an island in Lake Texcoco. The Spanish drained the lake over 150 years following the conquest, and Mexico City was built on the exposed lakebed. The consequence is that Mexico City is sinking unevenly, at rates between about 6 and 16 inches per year in different districts, because the clay lakebed compresses as the aquifer below is drawn down by the city's water extraction. The buried city sinks with it. Structures that were at a consistent depth when buried are now at inconsistent depth, tilted, sheared along fault lines created by differential settlement, in some cases displaced laterally from their original positions. The city above and the city below are both in motion. The 2021 partial collapse of a metro viaduct that killed 26 people occurred in a district where subsurface survey data had identified anomalous void spaces 3 years earlier. The connection between those voids and the structural failure has not been confirmed. It has not been ruled out. They are still finding it. Every city has a surface. The question is whether the surface is the city, or whether the surface is what the city chose to show. If this kind of research is what you are here for, subscribe. There is more coming that follows the same thread. Like the video if you found something you did not expect. And leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, because this channel reaches places we have not mapped yet either.